All right, I think we're ready to kick things off. So good afternoon to everyone who's joined us and welcome to this multi-sector pre-Easter briefing. In this session, we will focus on preventing the anticipated third wave and emphasize the call for greater social cohesion to achieve just that. I'm Iman Rupeti, and over the next hour, we intend to look at the ongoing and renewed impact on key sectors through the rise in super spreader events if we do not adhere to established protocols to contain the spread of COVID-19. We've heard from the President that today the National Coronavirus Command Council will finalize some of those potential restrictions. So that could affect how we move and behave over the next few days, as these are expected to be temporary and focus mainly on curfew gatherings and the trade in alcohol. So what the program is looking like, in a short while, we will kick off discussions with a snappy Q&A from various sector representatives. And then we're going to open the floor to questions from participants and our media colleagues. But first, here's the Solidarity Fund CEO, Thandi Nzimande, to welcome you and to set the context. Thandi? We need Thandi's microphone.
My apologies. Good afternoon to everybody. Good afternoon to all our stakeholders who have made the time to join us this afternoon. Also to express my appreciation to members of the media and our broader audience. With only a few days before the annual Easter holiday, you know that we come together under the theme, preventing the next wave, the need for social cohesion before the Easter holidays, and indeed beyond that. A year ago, South Africa was under alert level 5 of the lockdown, instituted to manage the spread of COVID-19. A year later, we are currently under alert level 1, and infection rates seem to be under control, although the threat of increased infections remain. We now know that the virus moves when we move. Infections can grow when we do not adhere to the COVID-19 safety protocols. Let me just take a moment to reiterate these. The proper wearing of masks, covering the nose and the mouth when in the company of friends and family, avoiding large gatherings, ensuring good ventilation, especially when using public transport, and maintaining social distance. Today, I am joined by the representatives of the South African Council of Churches, the SACC, the Liquor Traders Association, the Federated Hospitality Association of South Africa, FEDASA, and the Department of Transport. Any increased restrictions introduced by governments to protect lives will impact on these sectors and others more widely. Yet the constant tension between balancing the need to save lives and livelihoods remains ever present in the minds of government, the Solidarity Fund, and all economic players in the country. The choices we have to make to save lives will necessarily impact on livelihoods, and we have seen the cost of these choices throughout the year. As we enter the Easter weekend, which is deeply significant, we are highlighting the need for South Africans in general and business to play their part to adhere to the COVID-19 safety protocols and behave with vigilance and responsibility to ensure that we do not give rise to super spreader events, which can bring on the third wave of the pandemic. As we discuss how we can play our part to save lives and livelihoods for the next hour, I want to emphasize that despite all that we have lost in the past year, we have also seen the strength and resilience of the spirit of human solidarity. I am because you are because I am. This is the essence of Ubuntu, a culture of mutual care. If nothing else, I hope that this will remain with us post the pandemic, and that this will form the foundation of our social cohesion, that this will bring us together as South Africans in our common quest to build a better and stronger country, one with a deep sense of our shared nationhood and South African identity. I thank you. Iman, can I hand over back to you?
Thank you very much for that opening, Tandi. I think the most important thing there, reminding all of us that when, the virus moves when we move, and that is certainly going to be one of the concerns that we're going to get to the heart of in terms of management over the next 45 minutes or so. I want to just reiterate the panel, and you have already mentioned some of the all of the organizations that will be joining us in this meeting today. The Solidarity Fund, Dr. Gugu Ngabani is the co-head of the health pillar, will be speaking to us shortly. The General Secretary of the SACC, Bishop Malusi Mpumalwana, from the Liquor Traders Association, Lucky and Timane. Vidasa's Rosemary Anderson is with us. Santako's Tabisho Molelekwa, Dr. Nkosinathi Sishi from the Department of Transport, and speaking for the Ministry of Transport, Ayanda Ali Payne. So we have covered quite a few sectors there, and I think it's time we get into some of that content now. And Gugu, I want to turn it over to you, and let's kick off with the Solidarity Fund. We know that a lot of people are just aching for this opportunity to go and spend time with their family, friends, and their communities. It is an important time, but it does create these conditions for potential super spreader events, which may bring on this third anticipated wave of the pandemic in South Africa. From the fund's perspective, what is the message you're trying to get across to South Africans in a very deep and serious way?
Thank you for this opportunity and the introduction, Iman. Maybe let me begin by saying that when the Solidarity Fund was established a year ago, just on the eve of the commencement of the South African's level 5 lockdown, we knew we were in for a very long haul with the pandemic, but I do not think that we knew that a year later, we would not be any closer to being able to anticipate the finishing line of this pandemic. We're still a long way as it is. Indeed, the more we know about the virus, the more it confounds us. Scientists and medical health professionals have also urged us not to look at the vaccination as a silver bullet. Just a few days ago, India announced it has discovered a double mutation. We also know that the vaccines are being adjusted to be suitable to the new variants that we keep hearing about. However, there are some things we do know with certainty. The virus moves when we move, like Tandi has just said, and simple behavioral interventions are very effective and can save lives. And basically, that is the message that we want to keep on emphasizing, to be consistent with it, because it actually does help. It works. These include the proper wearing of the mask, covering both the nose and the mouth, even when in the company of friends and family. And we know how difficult that is. We are all affected. So the nice thing is that it's not just one individual or a particular group of people that we're asking to do this, but it's every single human being in the planet. Avoiding large gatherings, ensuring good ventilation, especially in public transports, and maintaining social distancing. And of course, washing of hands and all intervention in terms of preventing any infectious diseases and sanitizing surfaces. We know it works. We know that we are not all infected because of some of these prevention methodologies. However, as the Solidarity Fund, we want to emphasize that these interventions can save lives, and we call on South Africans to please play their part and adhere to them as they have been prescribed. Everybody has to adhere to them. We are all in it. One person's individual action affects everybody else. So there's no such thing with COVID as a selfish act. Actually, what you do or don't do affects everybody else in this pandemic. The economic cost of this pandemic has also been brutal, with the unemployment having increased significantly and many businesses having to close their doors, impacting directly and indirectly on the country's economy. As we collectively coexist alongside COVID-19, global and domestic predictions are that we could only start to see a recovery in 2022 and beyond. It is therefore incumbent upon all of us to behave responsibly, to avoid any further spikes. And when we started, we all had this common goal, and we're all talking about flattening the curve. We still need to flatten that curve. We need to reduce the impact of the spikes if we cannot prevent them completely. And we need to reduce the rate of infections through the creation of these super spreader events. We need to avoid the super spreader events as much as possible. This will ensure that government does not need to introduce more stringent restrictions, which will further impact negatively on the economic recovery and employment levels. So at the moment, South Africa is seeing record numbers of unemployment, which stands at 32.5% with almost 7.2 million people unemployed. These figures were released 18 March 2021 and suggest a 10-month decline in retail trade sales, which tells a story of limited availability of disposable income, which could also be linked to the rising unemployment levels. So it is not good enough to point to government for all this, since the decline in economic fortunes have been exacerbated in COVID-19 times. And the various levels of lockdown we have experienced over the year have also contributed to these economic misfortunes. We all have a responsibility to behave in a way that allows the economy to function. We also need to allow the economy to recover, and that is only through responsible action to prevent infections, and so that we do not go back to more stringent lockdowns. Right. And also to create jobs and for people to go back to their dignified lifestyles, although we all know that we don't know whether the old normal will ever come back. So as the solidarity, yes.
Right. You know, Thandi, sorry, Gugu, the one thing I want to ask you about before we move on to the rest of the panel is, we have heard over and over again about how communication is not channeled everywhere as impactfully and effectively as it should be. What is some of the work that you're engaging on, just before we move on to the rest of the other panelists, around driving the message and really differentiating how you spread the message around, you know, social cohesion and the risk around super spreader events?
So the Solidarity Fund has been engaging with major media organizations. We're working with Joe Public. We have ads that will be coming on TV to emphasize the messages on prevention. We're working with the different religious groupings. We're working with civil society, with NGOs, to make sure that we are spreading the message of these different kinds of preventions.
All right, thanks for that. I just want to let everyone who is listening know, and some of our colleagues as well, that if you want to begin to post questions, you're more than welcome, as the conversations progress, to direct them to a particular individual. You can post those in a chat. If you don't have anyone in particular in mind, I will field those questions on your behalf. All right, thank you very much to both Thandi and to Gugu for that. Let's move now to the South African Council of Churches. And, you know, if we all look back just a year ago, last Easter, we were on level 5. We had, you know, alarm bells were ringing. This was something new that we didn't know too much about. This year, our knowledge of how the virus is spread and what the risks are is a little more stark. We have certain restrictions in place, but we also know that human nature is such that there is a kind of, you know, distancing fatigue. People are tired of the messaging. As the church, and we have several religious holidays, by the way, not just the Christian ones, the Jewish ones and the Muslim ones as well. What are some of your major fears, Bishop Mpumlwana, about this particular period, and how we need to amend the way that we've been meeting and gathering and promoting religious events at such a critical time?
Thank you very much, Iman, and thank you to the Solidarity Fund for this conversation, and I hope a whole lot more people get to participate in it. We have been living with this now for a year, and I have to say that right at the beginning, we thought very naively that, you know, all you need to do is it's 21 days, this thing surfaces, we heal everyone that's sick, and we get on with our life. And we did not know that it's going to be this bad, and it has been bad. What we are fearing now is a kind of a tension between two things. One is you talked about fatigue. I think it's the exasperation on the part of particularly the Christian communities, that once again, they are going to have to miss Easter. And they are very, very upset about this. But then on the other hand, you're living with the reality that, you know, we have just had the second wave. And we counted the numbers of deaths of people, that just going into December, from the, if you like, the harvest of November, about 5,000 people passed away. And then the harvest of December was 15,695 people who passed away in January. And that comes from December. And it's really almost like just under a third of the total number of people that have died in 1 month. And so that gives you an idea of what it is that we're fearful of when we think about the third wave, which will probably be encouraged by going into the winter with the cold, and it's also the flu season. And so these two things, the exasperation of worshippers who really want to get out there and worship, and the reality that we're facing something that we may not be able to arrest once it begins, because it can then go into the winter all the way. And so in managing that, there has been a lot of conversations amongst religious leaders about this, and that not only should you be asking for more space, but you should also be asking for offering what you're going to do to mitigate this. Our message is absolutely that everything must be done to make sure that we stay within the COVID protocols that Candy mentioned right at the beginning. But it also means that you have to make sure that we tell our congregations that they must, as for 3 months at the SS, 3 months, there must be no birthday parties. You just have a cake with family, and no rituals and micimbi of culture. Please postpone this. And I have postponed 2 of my own that were due in April and May. And those kinds of things, we're asking that these are not church things, these are family things. And finally, we're trying to we're working with a number of other religious organizations to create what we call a religious forum against COVID, which will then bring an interfaith dimension to this. All of us can talk about Ramadan. We can talk about all the various traditions that we're going to have.
You talked there about some of the interventions, or just the way that you're changing the usual way of commemorating big events like this. What are some of the other ideas that are on the table? I suppose once you do have this interfaith dialogue going on, it will broaden the scope of, collaboration, understanding, and changing the way these events are commemorated. What are some of the other ideas that you're considering?
Most definitely. You know that Easter usually begins on Thursday night. Congregations come to a central place from Thursday, right, all the way up to Sunday. We've said none of this should happen. And that whatever the regime, whatever the regulations say, whatever the numbers are allowed, regardless, no one should come to a central place. There should be no catering and no cooking, so that people stay, in their various locations wherever they are, so that there is no prospect of, this kind of mass infection. So that's one of the things that have been put forward. But the idea is that we should deal with every incident. It does not matter if it's Christian, Muslim, Hindu, all of them. We must treat them together as a collective.
All right. Okay. So then we hear from the church around some of the changes and adaptations that need to happen over this period. And what we understand is that there will be room for more scope for that to happen as different interfaith organizations get together. Lucky and Timani, I want to bring you in from the Liquor Traders Association. I know that you have been on various media, adding your voice to a range of stakeholders around the country, calling on South Africans to play their part in behaving responsibly. It's not just to patrons, but also to people who fall within the organization, various industry and sector organizations. What is the latest on your expectations for the impact of a third wave? Both just in terms of the way the liquor industry is going to be affected, but how you're going to need to adapt in this period.
Good afternoon, Iman, and good afternoon to the panelists. And thank you to Solidarity Fund for setting this up. And good afternoon to media colleagues. Really appreciate the opportunity. For us, it's been very difficult. If you look at the 26th of March last year, when we first went on lockdown, till today, we almost have not been trading for over 133 days. That is very difficult for a sector that relies on hand-to-mouth type of a business enterprise. So meaning that for the fact that we have not been able to trade for almost 19 weeks, a lot of our liquor traders have been out of business. And if you look at the tavern sector, as it were, we support over 250,000 jobs. Those are the people that are dependent on taverns being able to operate on a daily basis. The fact that almost over 35% of the time we have not been able to trade means that a lot of jobs have to be shared. And this is a township economy that's badly in need of those jobs. So it's really been a very difficult moment for us as a tavern sector. But be that as it may, we have really committed ourselves to making sure that in how we conduct ourselves, in how we sell the product, we support government's efforts in fighting against the COVID-19 pandemic. We stand 100% behind government in all its efforts to ensure that we fight against the pandemic. When we last experienced the ban, which was most devastating, the 28th of December last year, we understood that we had a part to play somewhat in ensuring that we understand government's decision, even though it was difficult. Our understanding at first was that we're going to close for 2 weeks. It went on for longer, and that became something that we could not entirely tolerate, but we understood where the government was coming from. But our hope was that with that action from government, we're going to be consulted in future bans or restrictions. And it saddens me that today I can announce that government has not yet come to us. Government has not yet consulted with the tavern sector or the alcohol industry as a whole. And yet we are faced with this possibility that we might be banned. And if you look at the past 7 to 8 weeks that we've been allowed to trade, we haven't had any incidents that can be linked to a super spreader event or a tavern being accused of not having observed the COVID-19 regulations or protocol.
Yeah, don't you think that's a bit of a risky position though, Lucky, because there are, establishments that are flouting the rules. I mean, I saw a story down in KZN as well, where both the curfew and the sale of alcohol restrictions have been flouted. There's a question from the citizen from Retumetse Makwea, who says, in Mpumalanga, there's an event this weekend. VIPs appear to get a bottle of wine free per person. What about responsible marketing trading practices during COVID-19? And we've also heard from the police ministry about crackdowns here in Johannesburg, for example, where, operators don't respect the rules. So, it's risky to say that we're acting as one and we're all obeying the law when there are incidents where that's not happening.
So if you look at the past 7 weeks, I mean, our cases have been ranging at about 1,000 per day on average. And it's because there hasn't been any super spreader events that could make those cases to rise up. But also, if you look at the issue of SEPs, we as liquor traders, and most especially as the alcohol industry, we are actually working with SEPs in ensuring that there is total compliance on the ground. We support the Ukai Mulao program that is being run by the Gauteng provincial government as well, the SEPs division of that. So for us, it's not really to sit in a corner and hope that things are going to happen on their own, but we are doing something about it. And the liquor industry has invested over 5 billion rand towards community patrollers that ensure that there is compliance in the 5 key hotspot provinces that have been identified as key as super spreader provinces, as it were, if super spreader is the right way to use in that regard. But also we've got tavern focused compliance programs which target taverns that are not complying with all the COVID-19 regulations, and we seek to educate them in a classroom type training to make sure that we get them to fall in line. We do accept, and we are the first to admit this, that we will have rotten apples, and those rotten apples seem to enjoy a lot of coverage than the ones that are complying, and we need to deal with those. For us, anyone who does not comply with any COVID-19 regulations ought to lose their licenses. That's how serious we take this matter.
Okay. I want to quickly put something to you before I move on to another panelist. Lucky, this is from Ane van Sale. Did you also receive info that no liquor trading will be allowed for 11 days? According to insiders at the NCC, it will be banned from the 2nd of April. Have you heard anything like that? This is Ane van Sale at Netwerk 24. I'm just throwing that in while we're talking about this specific issue.
I have seen the statement, and I have confirmed that it is a genuine statement sent by Salba. But for us, I think it's very important that we respect government processes, and we like to give government space to be able to make that announcement when the time comes. We really would not like to, preempt what the government is going to say, but we like to believe that, the president does understand that liquor traders need to be allowed to operate. We have done the good work in the past 8 weeks to be able to enjoy trading over an Easter period, which is a very significant period for us to be able to recover from the losses that we have suffered over the 19 weeks that we have not been trading.
All right, I'm going to move on to the Federated Hospitality Association of South Africa. This is FEDASA, and their national chairperson, Rosemary Anderson, is with me. This sentence, I think, was mentioned, Rosemary, by Thandi right at the beginning, the COVID-19 pandemic bringing to the fore issues of lives versus livelihoods, and it's a constant struggle in the fight against the pandemic. This Easter holiday period, of course, the whole intention of all these stakeholders getting together is to push for social cohesion, even under these very abnormal circumstances. And I perhaps want to put to you something that would be of keen interest and impact for the sector. Easter is one of the top seasonal events for the hospitality sector. What do you stand to lose if there is a stricter lockdown now? And in that vein, how do you push society to behave?
Iman, yes, if there is a lockdown, just like we've spoken about now, especially with regards to the alcohol, it will have a really negative effect. And as we mentioned before, there's such a difficult balancing act between lives and livelihoods, but it's actually becoming one and the same thing. As a sector, Fit House, we really do believe that there is a way where it can be a win-win situation. What we've just got to do is embrace a culture where safety protocols are second nature to you. Just if you were going to cross a busy road, you would naturally look left and right for your own preservation. It should be exactly the same thing ingrained in us with regards to our health and safety protocols for COVID. We should just naturally want to wear a mask, not because we have to, but because it actually protects us and others. We should be washing our hands all the time because we know it protects us and others. All of these should be almost, we must embrace it as a self-preservation. And I really believe if we did that as an industry and as the whole of South Africa, we actually would be able to save lives and livelihoods, and government would not have to crack down on the sale of alcohol and things like that. Unfortunately, what government doesn't sometimes appreciate is that when they do, even venues, for example, that have food, lovely food plus beverages, once you stop selling alcohol, there's no attraction to go to that restaurant anymore, because you don't want to pay for that expensive steak and then not be able to enjoy your favorite glass of wine or your favorite beer. So it has a tremendous impact, and our industry is so compromised financially at the moment. Any further restrictions will just be devastating for many people.
How do you balance these mixed messages? You know, everyone knows what's at stake, and maybe in the course of your answer, you can also just remind us of just what's happened in the sector because of, the virus spreading at a rate that is quite rapid, leading to us needing to adhere to stricter, prevention protocols. People are being encouraged to rather stay home, to not go anywhere, and at the same time, we're encouraged to support sectors like the hospitality sectors, the restaurateurs, the tourism industry, and so on. How do we credibly balance those two things?
You're perfectly right. They almost seem at odds with each other. But that's what I'm just saying. If you do travel, you can still be perfectly safe if you just practice all the safety protocols. So I know one refers to traveling, you're actually spreading virus. But if you actually are very good in your own maintenance of the health and safety protocols, you're far less likely to actually spread it. And unfortunately, someone who is going to not have a job anymore and no food for their families, it's a very difficult thing what they'd have to balance up, COVID versus not having any food on the table. So this is the situation where we're in, and a lot of people in hospitality and tourism, as Lucky mentioned earlier, they are so financially compromised already, with over a third of the year being closed, that they are just struggling to hold on to still stay afloat, and unfortunately also employ all the people. And a lot of small businesses, whether they're taverns or coffee shops, they have not, when they normally started their business, they would have taken out a loan or mortgage on their home in order to finance the business they're in. When the business goes down, they lose their home too. People are literally losing everything they've worked for decades. It's critical. And at the same time now, we're balancing that against the spread of COVID. So it's a really difficult balancing act. It's a real moral dilemma, Iman, it really is.
Thanks for that, Rosemary. We're going to go through, we've got a couple more panelists as well. Just to remind you, if you would like to pose a question, you're welcome to do that in the chat. There will be an opportunity towards the end to take as many questions as possible. The ones that I think, we can fit into the conversation as we're proceeding with, I'm raising those as we go along, but please do feel free. And if there's a particular individual you want to have your question answered, please direct it to them. Let's come now to the South African National Taxi Council, Santaco, and Thabisho Molelekwa is the Chief Strategic Officer for Santaco. I know that there's been a lot of criticism around taxis, capacity, the risks for creating moments for the virus to spread. There's also been a call within the taxi industry to, for patrons or passengers to make sure that when they board, that they wear their mask and they adhere to the protocols. So maybe just share with us a little bit about renewed efforts, particularly in this high traffic moment within the taxi sector and the taxi industry, to ensure that people move safely.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Iman and the panelists. Look, I think there's one thing that has been an oversight, on the side of the critics, is the fact that the industry is equally concerned about the impact and spread of COVID-19. In fact, we are as much interested in the mitigation as everybody else, precisely because the increasing deaths of COVID has got a direct impact on our business as the industry. And being the industry that connects the communities with various centers of the economy, we have been responding positively to the call by the South African government in terms of collaboration and fighting the pandemic. And this is why in the very early stages of COVID, one of the things that we did was to ensure that we do not necessarily act drastically against offenders, but and in this case drivers, but we also educate them on the importance of playing their part to ensure that we all comply with the rules as given. And from there, now that we have everybody in full swing of what is happening, one of the things that we have done late last year was to ensure that there is a policy around operations in as far as COVID is concerned. One was that because what we have realized was that in some instances there's a collaboration between commuters and drivers in as far as wearing of masks is concerned in taxis, particularly short distances. So what we have done is to ensure that our patrol vehicles countrywide continue to monitor taxis as they move, and any driver who's found to be not wearing a mask or having commuters in his or her taxi who are not wearing masks, that driver is liable for a spot fine of about 500 rand. I know that in KZN they've increased that to 800 rand, and if it's a repeated offender, a suspension comes in immediately. On long distance operations, we have ensured that particularly your big ranks, there is a screening of people, because this is now from one province to the other. Temperatures are taken, as well as commuters must ensure that there's a register for those commuters. But also importantly, every 2 hours, those taxis must stop. Commuters must get off a taxi. The taxi must be allowed to breathe. To ensure that we continue to have the taxi getting fresh air from time to time. But apart from that, we are also engaging the government to ensure that we do find the mechanisms that can be installed in taxis to ensure that airborne viruses are being able to be managed while taxis are in motion.
You've answered my second question there, which what are some of the interventions for the longer hours that people spend on long haul trips? And so thank you very much for answering that part. Just want to go back to the patrols that you say, industry kind of led patrols. Give us a sense of what numbers you've deployed and how well that is working across the country.
You've got 950 taxi associations countrywide. Every association has at least 2 patrol vehicles. So all these vehicles are meant to go out. They are meant to visit the ranks to ensure that to observe compliance. And for those associations with a larger number of fleet, these vehicles can be patrolling the routes of the associations to monitor compliance, among other things. In fact, as we venture into the Easter weekend, which we will be launching tomorrow, and I'm also proud to indicate that we are collaborating with the National Liquor Traders Council tomorrow in this event, as well as Distel, as part and parcel of intensifying compliance from our passengers as well as our drivers, given that these passengers are the same clients that are clients of the liquor traders, the liquor industry.
Ayanda, I want to come to you then from the Department of Transport, from a ministerial perspective. And of course, I will bring in Dr. Nkosinathi Sishi, who's the Deputy DDG in the Department of Transport, to maybe co-answer and manage the next few questions. What Thabisha was talking about points to a greater sense of collaboration between the stakeholders in areas where people are on the move and people have to move. Can you just share with us from the department's perspective how some of this cooperation is being run, and whether any special sort of arrangements have been made over the Easter period?
Iman, thank you very much. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists as well as the participants on the platform. Please allow me to also convey Minister Mbalula's greetings, his support and his well wishes. I think it's quite important that we outline that as the department, we have dual concerns this time around. We're not only plagued with making sure that people arrive alive during these high traffic volume periods like Easter, but we're also concerned about making sure that modes of transport are not used to spread COVID-19. You'll remember, Iman, that in fact it was air travel that brought through the COVID virus to South Africa. So we are doing all that we can to make sure to prevent the further spread of COVID-19, public transport, be it on roads, rail, or in aviation, as I mentioned. Collaboration is absolutely key. I'm glad that Thabisha has spoken about some of the multidisciplinary approaches that Santaco has taken. They've been very active in taking initiative, in fact, working with the liquor industry, working with the Department of Transport, as well as other stakeholders. And that's one thing that I think is very important. I mean, the theme for this particular conversation that we're having is much ado about social cohesion. And we're of the view as the department that if we can't join hands, and of course that is not literally, but if we can't join hands in terms of working together, we're not going to stop the spread of COVID-19. And so it's very important that we partner up. We've also partnered up with the likes of Distel, for example, which is one of the players in the liquor industry, to say, how do we spread the message of safe alcohol consumption? We've partnered with various associations to say, how do we ensure that we get the sanitizers to your taxi ranks, to your taxi drivers, to your individual commuters? So you're quite right. The one way in which we're going to deal with this pandemic is to make sure that we work together.
Working together operationally, there's only so much that you can do. You mentioned the term social cohesion, which is one of the sort of key interest outcomes for this session. How do you get people to buy in? I mean, we asked the churches their perspective on this. We've asked the hospitality industry their perspective on this. What is the Department of Transport's perspective on this, getting people's buy-in?
I think repetition breeds memorability, Iman. You know, if you drive the message home, and this is exactly what the Solidarity Fund does as well. We see their posters on different roadsides. We hear their adverts. We see the adverts on television as well. To repeat that message is one way to drive it home. And I think we've been successful in doing just that, because Minister Mbalula is always on the ground. The team is always on the ground. We have activations across the country where we're not only spreading the message of road safety, but also of adhering to the COVID protocols. I think it's important that during our roadblocks, we spread that message. We also speak, of course, to the traffic officers to say to them, while we don't stop law enforcement, we have to do so in a manner that makes sure that we don't spread COVID-19. So social distancing as and where possible, and where you have to do come close, make sure that you have your mask, make sure that you sanitize whichever pen that you'll be using. So the message is not only to road users, but to also your law enforcement officials. And very quickly, Iman, it's not only to drivers. Hey, this is why I use the term road users. Your passengers, your pedestrians also have a part to play. If you get into a vehicle and you see that other people around you are not wearing their masks, the onus is on you as well as a passenger to speak up.
I think you touched on it very, sort of briefly, but drinking under the influence, a big issue, another area of potentially reckless behavior that might impact the spread of both the virus and escalate hospitalizations. What action is the department considering to mitigate this risk? I know you've touched on the roadblocks. What else is there?
Yeah. So over and above the roadblocks and the various awareness campaigns that speak to the psyche of the nation as it pertains to alcohol consumption, because I think we can discuss that until the cows come home, we've also brought in forms of breathalyzers that are COVID responsible, if I can use that term, which means they are disposable. So as opposed to using a breathalyzer test that could be used for as many people as possible, we make sure that they've got a cap on them. Iman, I can use this breathalyzer. You take that cap, detach it from that contraption, and then it's disposed of. You sanitize, for example, that breathalyzer test to make sure that in our testing, to make sure that people are complying, we're not inadvertently spreading COVID-19. But we're also going over and above that, and this is more long-term, but with your legislative frameworks to make sure that we see how we can reduce the permitted alcohol consumption level when people are on the roads. And of course, this is subject to your parliamentary processes, but Minister Mbalula has never shied away from the 0.00% in your bloodstream of alcohol to say that this is something that may just help us going forward, not only with dealing with COVID-19, but also stopping the carnage on our roads. You know, when people are under the influence of alcohol, Iman, they throw caution to the wind, they release their inhibition, and they're less likely to comply. So we are trying our best using a number of interventions to ensure that people limit their alcohol consumption before they get behind the wheel of a car. And also when they're on the roads, we know that pedestrians are the number one in terms of your casualties. So sometimes people drink and they decide to take a walk, and that's when they will not only fall victim to your collisions, but can also take their masks off and, as I said, spread COVID-19. So through all those means and methods, we're trying to get the message home.
Dr. Sishi, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, just from an operational perspective as well.
Absolutely. I think Ayanda has covered the entire spectrum of the program, you know, that we've put in place to not only to deal with the challenges of the moment, but to also show that our approach and philosophy is that of ensuring that on a daily basis we live the principles, we live it in the way we interact with the public. The collaboration that we have established across all provinces with metros, with provincial structures, with transport entities, have ensured that the message is unique, is consolidated, and that the message that we are articulating is also generated from the experiences of our stakeholders and all our colleagues that we work with within government. We have ensured that within the net joint structures of governments, there's a strong presence of transport representatives, to ensuring that in the broader, government program, of behavioral change, the transport policy is articulated accurately, and I have captured this very well. Thank you.
We've got about 15 minutes on the clock, and I would like to invite both the participants and some of our members, colleagues from the media who'd like to pose questions to any of our panelists today. Please feel free to do so on the chat, and I will certainly relay those to the panelists. You can select a particular person if you'd like. Gugu and Thandi, maybe to put this part to you, the reason why it's important to have all stakeholders who effectively make the message or the reality or the possibility of social cohesion a reality together in a room, but this work is important and that it's ongoing. Maybe Gugulethu, I can just put that to you, just to respond why it's so important that we have fora like this that is organic and responsive. Or Thandi, you can as well. I don't think Gugu's up on the line.
I'm back, yeah. No, thanks, Iman. I think one thing that is certain and we know for sure is that it's only through collaborative effort that we will get anywhere with this pandemic. We need everybody's inputs, and we need to all have the same message and know what we need to do, so that there is no confusion in what action is required to get this pandemic behind us. So that is why it's important to make sure that, for example, that the transport department is here, because you can say a message, but people have to practically know how to exactly implement what you are asking them to implement. And from the religious sector as well, they need to know practically what is possible within their context so that the message is clear, and then it's the how the message is then implemented.
Yeah, and Tanya, maybe this one is for you. Just as the seasonal changes encroach upon us as well, which create a heightened sort of risk that we saw echoed last year at this time, this message couldn't be driven home more strongly now than at any other time.
Yes, thanks, Iman. Indeed, it's with winter approaching, many are worried that the third wave will hit us around winter time as people come together in enclosed spaces and perhaps do not apply the behavioral mechanisms that we're all aware of. And in particular, the ventilation aspect, where in the winter, we, much like the cold and flu season, we all congregate together. And if we don't apply the masks and the social distancing and the ventilation, we will see ourselves moving towards that third wave. It is very much within our control to avoid that. So I'd encourage everybody to please keep that in the back of their minds as they move into winter.
This certainly is a critical time, both the convergence of a seasonal change and the advent of really important religious holidays. I have some questions that I would love to put to certain members of the panel, but for those who might have something that they want to add, something important that is important for both the stakeholders and the South African public to know. I'd love for you also to just indicate, and I'll bring you up as well. Bishop Mpumulwana, there was a question very early on put to you around the regulation, well, not put to you, but put out there, and I think you responded to it. From Adrian Kotze asking whether government can update the regulations with a minimum standard and quality of masks to be worn in public, similar to the DTI's guidelines for cloth mask manufacturers, that masks with vents and neck buffs are not allowed. And when we see people all the time, and you kind of think, how is that even going to prevent you from somebody else's sneeze or cough? So I think a lot of people share that concern that you shouldn't wash and rewear disposable masks, that a crocheted mask or a sock protects no one, and so on. I see that there is a response there, Bishop, from you, and maybe you can just share that with the rest of the participants as well.
Thanks again, Iman. It really is to say that, yes, it's a very important point, but it's also a difficult one because people take whatever is available to them. And they will just use a vest, they'll use anything, whatever is closest. I've seen people actually sharing masks as they one comes out of a taxi and then gives it to the next person that's going to take the taxi. And so it happens a lot because the people don't have. And as I say, if you have to choose between a loaf of bread and a mask, you choose the loaf of bread. And in fact, I should say that maybe it's okay to own up to the fact that I chair the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Social Behavior Change. And we did make a recommendation that they should consider free masks, basic masks available in poor communities, because otherwise you're not going to be able to bring this down. I think that is obviously the issue. There is a constraint of the fiscus. But it's a point that we will want to take up again, and we're having a meeting tomorrow, and we'll bring this up again and have a further discussion on it, given the current circumstances. But I wanted to say,
will there be an announcement forthwith?
Yes, I wanted to say also, just in closing from my part, is to say that that we are seriously concerned about, I don't know what the minister says. There's a question that's put there, by, I think, and what we expect tonight when the president addresses that. We expect anything. We've made our requests, but we expect and we'll leave with what we get. I want to say very, very strongly that even if we were allowed to have 1 million people in the room, we need to know, and the message from Paul in the book of Acts that says, keep watch over yourselves and all the flock of which you, Holy Spirit, has made you overseers, be shepherds of the church of God, which is brought by the God, Jesus' own blood. In other words, don't take responsibility and make sure that you don't, as a result of your desire to have as many people as possible, cause infections. I think it's important that I don't want to be responsible for burying somebody who would not have died had I not made them come to the service.
But are you preparing for the possibility, I think, which is also what Ane is asking, that, gatherings like church gatherings might be banned over this period?
I actually will be surprised if that happens. I don't believe that the government will do that. I believe that the government will give some kind of measure of what is acceptable, especially because the churches have indeed proven over the past year that they are capable of doing that. The super spreaders have been our funerals, not the actual service itself, because of the emotions at funerals and the whole week of planning and people sitting together and eating and drinking. I think that if we can curb those, and we are on our side of it, because we have written out what we call guidelines with norms and standards that are very, very stringent. They're actually tighter than the government rules.
All right, Bishop, thank you very much for that. I think you're still sticking around. We've got about 8 minutes or so to go before the end of this. But if there are comments from any of the other panelists, you're more than welcome to, open your video or to make an indication that you'd like to add anything. Ayanda, you're still there. If you want to add anything as well, just from the Department of Transport's perspective, Tabisha, you as well, a caution to people who would be traveling. I know you shared some of the interventions that you're setting down from the Taxi Association perspective, but you have to talk directly to your commuters as well. And maybe we can start with you, Tabisha, on how you make this plea, whether you are staying in Johannesburg or in your various provinces, or whether you are traveling. What are the things that you really want your passengers to bear in mind in the interest of their own health safety, as well as that of the rest of the country?
Look, one thing that we have promoted, especially with our passengers, was that they must not be coerced into getting onto taxis that do not comply with COVID-19 regulations. They should not be intimidated into submission. And secondly, we have always said on long distance operations during high seasons, pregnant women with children under 1 year should really, they are advised not really to travel. But importantly, we have said to our passengers that there is nothing that beats collaboration in this regard, because it is only through collaboration that we can really be able to defeat the spread of COVID, when they are really our eyes and ears, and we are their eyes and ears, and we are able to share ideas on how best to deal with issues going forward.
And lucky for you, I know there was some back and forth on the chat just regarding the potential announcements made by government later. You are saying in the chat, we received the information that was put to you earlier on, and we will have to ascertain its authenticity. Whatever the government announces tonight is going to have an impact on the way that you operate, whether it is business as usual, whether there are restrictions. But what are your concerns for whether there will be restrictions around the sale of alcohol? And then in that regard, what is your call to those who do purchase and consume alcohol?
I think our major concern is the continued decisions that continue to be made for the sector without the sector involved. I think that is our major gripe. And like I stated earlier, we support all government's measures put in place to ensure that we fight the COVID-19 pandemic. We see ourselves as citizens of the country before we are business people. So we are not at all chasing profits, but we are chasing, a survivor, which in this case means that government needs to make decisions that are favorable to us as liquor traders and do not condemn us, to a livelihood where we have no ability to put food on the table. But I also want to highlight something that talks to our seriousness in supporting government's efforts in ensuring that we fight the COVID-19 pandemic together. It is our partnership that we are launching tomorrow with Santaco, funded by Distel, to the tune of about 6 million rand, that will ensure that we are able to support the taxi industry with masks and sanitizers, because we understand and appreciate as liquor traders that, the taxi industry, even though it's far removed from us in terms of, how we relate, but it carries a lot of people that are our customers. It also means that for us as liquor traders, we are able to play a role as responsible citizens of the country, but also as responsible business people to support another sector with all the PPEs that are required to make sure that we fight the COVID-19 pandemic together. For us, a healthy South Africa, far removed from COVID-19, is what we care about. We do not really care about what happens with the announcement by the president, but so much so that we are able to defeat the pandemic together if we work as one as a nation, and we're committed to doing that.
Right. And this could be for anyone, really, if somebody wants to indicate, maybe Rosemary, even for you, the success of this year, and we've been talking about it quite a lot over the last couple of days, especially, is it depends on the vaccines being rolled out. And how much of a setback is the delay in the program going to affect each of these sectors? And Rosemary, maybe you can kick things off here.
Yes, I think it's very important. It was alluded to earlier that it's not the only thing that's going to manage this whole pandemic, but it is a very important facet. So it's a multi-pronged approach. So we really hope government will be able to roll out the vaccine sooner than later, and far more and far quicker. But in the meantime, just like what the UK is doing, they're still implementing the protocols very strenuously, even though they got like over 50% of their adult population that have already been vaccinated. So it's a multi-pronged thing. It's not just one thing that does it. And the big thing is consistency. We need to be consistent with regards to the protocols.
Ayanda, you have a view on this one, just on the setback around the vaccines?
Yeah, I think just to echo Tabi and also Rosemary's concerns about not only the vaccine, but in the message really to our commuters and to all the South Africans. I feel sometimes we do have COVID fatigue, we've been on this journey for quite a long time. And when faced with the frustrations of everything that's been happening, whether it's PPE scandal, whether it is the vaccinations, whether it is the regulations, when we're faced with the South African collective frustration, it's always to remember the why. Always sit back and step back and remember, why are these regulations there? As Kukuletu said very quickly, the virus moves when we move. So the issues of mobility for me are very, very critical. We must remain mindful of those. And just also remember as South Africans that the regulations are not there to punish us, but to protect us. So yes, we'll read about all the things that we wish we could change, that we wish we could do differently. But at the heart of it all is lives and making sure that lives are safe. So when all these things happen around us, Iman, I would beg us as South Africans to just take a step back, take a deep breath in and out, and ask yourself, why is it again that we have these regulations? Why is it again that we are in this position? And it's all in a bid to save lives. So if we remember our why, we'll be able to deal with some of the frustrations that we're facing as a country.
Thank you for that. And to go back then to the way we began this program, we're here at the invitation of the Solidarity Fund, #Unity in Action. And I want to give the final word to Thandi and Zimande. We've gathered to bring all of these different stakeholders together. The whole intention is to send the message out around preventing a potential third wave, which will be debilitating for South Africa. And in order to do that, to create the social cohesion needed to see that, that dream or that core realized. And so I'll give the last word to you.
Thank you so much, Iman, and thank you to the panelists. I think this has been a very rich discussion. And I hope a strong reminder to all South Africans that, in fact, this particular pandemic depends on each one of us doing our bit. There isn't somebody out there, somebody else who is responsible. Each one of us is responsible to play out on those very straightforward protocols. We were able to beat the second wave using just those protocols. We are waiting the vaccinations, but truly the protocols will assist us in moving forward. So wearing that mask, wearing it properly over the nose and over the mouth, making sure of that ventilation is critical. Social distancing is critical. And of course, sanitizing. But it really is very much a collaborative effort of every single South African. And thank you very much. Thank you for hosting us, and to all the panelists too.
Well, maybe to wrap things up again is to say thank you to everyone on behalf of the Solidarity Fund. And there's a really powerful saying by essayist Anais Nin, who says, "We do not see things as they are, we see things as we are." And so, if we want to achieve this goal of no fatalities, or at least minimizing significantly how many people will die because of this virus, because of reckless behavior, things that are within our control and reach to prevent, then we certainly have a task ahead of us, and it is within our reach to each do. Even on the masks, as Bishop Mpumulwana was saying, so many people have so many, maybe divert for those who have. some of that budget that we have to purchase some, a mask for somebody that we know who might not be able to afford one. On that note, thank you very much to everyone. And as we depart for your holidays, if you're lucky enough to have a break, please do be safe and watch out for more alerts, for more briefings and gatherings hosted by the Solidarity Fund. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Iman.
Thank you, Iman.